Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me at the back, and if our live streaming is working, I hope in about 3 seconds' time you can hear me in the overspill room. Welcome to this, our US election briefing here at the IEA. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director General here, and I will be chairing your proceedings this evening. In exactly 1 year's time, the next President of the United States will be inaugurated outside the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. We are probably not much closer to knowing who that might be than we have been for the past year. But if you thought that the last 12 months in British politics has been pretty wacky, crazy, unpredictable, and insane, then just take a look over the pond. Not many people on this side of the Atlantic would have predicted an outright Conservative majority, Jeremy Corbyn to become the next leader of the Labour Party, the Scottish Nationalists to win virtually every seat in Scotland, the total evisceration of the Liberal Democrats. A lot of spectacular and unpredictable things have happened here. But what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, I think, defies political and electoral gravity even more so. So to tee you up for some of the issues, this is not a balanced film, but for some of the issues and the flavour of the debate in the United States of America, we've put together just a few clips and television adverts that have been broadcast over the airwaves.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
The politicians can pretend it's something else, but Donald Trump calls it radical Islamic terrorism. That's why he's calling for a temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what's going on. He'll quickly cut the head off ISIS and take their oil. And he'll stop illegal immigration by building a wall on our southern border that Mexico will pay for.
We will make America great again.
I understand that when the mainstream media covers immigration, it doesn't often see it as an economic issue. But I can tell you it is a very personal economic issue. And I will say the politics of it would be very, very different if a bunch of lawyers or bankers were crossing the Rio Grande. Or if a bunch of people with journalism degrees were coming over and driving down the wages in the press. Then we would see stories about the economic calamity that is befalling our nation. If I'm elected president, we will triple the Border Patrol. We will build a wall that works. We will secure the border. I'm Ted Cruz, and I approve this message.
If you're doing everything right, but find it harder and harder to get by, you're not alone. While our people work longer hours for lower wages, almost all new income goes to the top 1%. My plan? Make Wall Street banks and the ultra-rich pay their fair share of taxes. Provide living wages for working people. Ensure equal pay for women. I'm Bernie Sanders. I approve this message because together we can make a political revolution and create an economy and democracy that works for all and not just the powerful few.
Right here in the red scarf.
What do you do with Gitmo?
Keep every rotten, dangerous terrorist who's there and never let them go.
Good for you.
30% of the people the president has released from Guantanamo have gone back in the terrorism business. We better raise our voices. Mrs. Clinton would be just the same as the president. Any commander-in-chief who would consider letting any of those people out is betraying the American people.
American Needs is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
I've spoken of the shining city all my political life. God blessed and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still.
Unfortunately, Ronald Reagan isn't running in this election. But the first four advertisements we showed you were just so depressing from a free market liberal perspective that I thought I had to put the immigration advertisement with Ronald Reagan on the end. If you're a betting person, and those of you who know me know I never bet, but if you're a betting person, here are the present odds for what will happen. In the Republican Party, Trump is currently the favourite to be the nominee at 5-2, a little ahead of Marco Rubio at about 4-1 and Ted Cruz at 8-1. But if we look towards the general election, who will actually be the next president of the United States of America? I looked at the odds on Betfair Exchange, a site I very rarely visit, I should say. And the implied chances of the following becoming President of the United States are as follows, if you believe the market odds. Hillary Clinton, 48.5%. Donald Trump, 15.3%. Marco Rubio, 12.2%. Bernie Sanders, 9.1%. Ted Cruz, 4.8%. Jeb Bush, 4.3%. And Chris Christie, 1.2%. Or you might actually decide that things are so strange on the other side of the pond that we have yet to see from the field of candidates the person who will emerge as the next president of the United States of America. If you think, for example, there might be a hung convention and Paul Ryan might be the next president, that's a 0.2% chance. Or if you want to follow my bet, not really a prediction, a very, very long odds bet, if both the Democrat and the Republican parties go completely insane and Michael Bloomberg enters the race and wins as an independent, my £60 bet will yield me a profit of £20,000, which should then just about be enough to pay the extra tax he's going to put on fizzy drinks, tobacco and everything else that I'll have to pay if he does become president. So that's a cursory glance at the markets. I wonder if I can ask our 4 star-studded panellists to join the stage. Please welcome them. I'll introduce each of them in turn. Mark, Brooks, please come on, if you take those 2 over there. Patrick here. Let me introduce our panellists in the order in which they are going to speak. On my far right, Mark Gettleson is a US and UK elections commentator and a strategic communications professional who's advised over a dozen campaigns on data-driven communications, micro-targeting in recent years on both sides of the Atlantic. And it says here, is recognised as one of the few commentators who correctly picked every Senate race result correctly in 2014. Next to him is Brooks Newmark, currently a research associate at the Centre for International Relations at Oxford University. Brooks was the Conservative MP for Braintree from 2005 to 2015. Amongst his other roles was Minister for Civil Society during the coalition government. He has a long history with American politics, working on George Bush Sr.'s presidential campaign in 1980, so presumably campaigning against Ronald Reagan in the primary. Yes. Yep. Thank you. So we look forward to you justifying the voodoo economics line, Brooks. Next is Patrick Basham, founding director of the Democracy Institute and author of Scared of Us, or Scared of US, How an M&M Foreign Policy Can Rescue America from Obama and Hillary's Kumbaya World. Described variously as a must-read, an example of Patrick thinking the unthinkable, and in his provocative agenda-setting iconoclastic book, he argues for America adopting what he calls muscular minimalism. He applies Sun Tzu's art of war to today's global environment, and in it manages to criticise and damn neocons, American firsters, and Wilsonian progressives, so making enemies on all sides. Patrick's going to talk about some of the thoughts he's got in here, and this is available to purchase afterwards in the room just opposite for a mere £9 or $15 US.
Or 20.
We may take gold as well. And last but by no means least is Kate Andrews, a board member of Republican Overseas UK, who was involved in Governor Mitt Romney's cataclysmically unsuccessful campaign for the presidency, which she is still sore about. And I'm actually surprised to see her tonight without her draft Romney badge on, which she tends to wear around town a lot. She's also, in her day job, the head of communications and a research fellow at the Adam Smith Institute, but we're delighted that she will be joining us next month here at the IEA as our news editor. Please welcome again our 4 panellists. I'm going to ask each of them to speak for about 6 or 7 minutes. We've given them each a different, slightly broad theme to talk about. So we hope that you'll get a good overview of all of the various issues involved in this election. Then there'll be plenty of time for questions and interjections at the end. After about 7 minutes of speaking, I will ring this bell gently. After about 8 minutes, I will ring it more loudly. And after 9 minutes or more, I will throw it at you
the red
in order to try and and the trap door will open. So to kick off our proceedings, Mark.
Hi everyone. I am going to start my 7 minutes with 10 seconds of interactivity. Ta-da! What is the significance of this year? I'm sure in this illustrious audience, what is the electoral significance of something that last happened in 1948? Anyone? They did get it very wrong. That is not, however, the answer I'm looking for, so I'm not counting it. Anyone? What was that, sorry?
Outsiders? Something to do with outsiders, maybe?
No, not to do with outsiders. This was the last time that the Democratic Party won a presidential election having won twice before then. Democrats have not won 3 terms on the trot, unless you're speaking to Al Gore. The Democrats have not won 3 terms on the trot since 1948. In fact, in almost every election after 1948, you'd have 2 terms of Republicans, then 2 terms of Democrats. The key exceptions being 1980 and 1988, which are both won by Republicans, giving them 3 terms. So the basis of my starting premise, and I don't think it's a bad place to start, is that this should, historically speaking, be a Republican election. It's a Republican's election to lose. Their win in the 2014 senatorial, midterm, gubernatorial, and crucially, State House, State Senate elections in 2014 was unprecedented for them. You have to go back well into the pre-FDR period to look at such wide-ranging Republican success. And much as midterms aren't a direct correlation between what will happen at the next election, the decimation of the Democratic Party in certain states cannot be overstated. You only have to look at the number of candidates running for the Democratic nomination to realize that the Democratic bench is not large. There were not large numbers of people coming forward to be their party's standard bearer in this election. Another number for you, 3%. All other, and we are at the IEA, all other things being equal, if the Republicans can get 3% more white voters to show up to the polls, they would win the election. They wouldn't just win the election, they would win all these swing states that President Obama won twice, including Pennsylvania, that they haven't won since 1988. One of the key things of this election, if you look at the polls, could well be an increase in turnout of white voters. Why is that important? Well, if swing states are less Latino and more white than most other states. The Latino vote, for instance, is heavily concentrated in states like New York and California, where it doesn't usefully provide any kind of help for a Democrat in the Electoral College. So the white vote should be very important in this election. And the Republican National Committee were very, very aware that this was their election to lose, and the only thing that could mess it up was a candidate who was too extreme for the majority of American general election voters. Heaven forfend. So they came up with quite a clever wheeze. This is not an official strategy, but you only have to look at the map to notice it. They make heavily delegate-rich states like California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, who tend to vote for moderate Republican candidates. In the nomination process, they make them winner take all. So that if you win the state of California, you grab all its delegates to the convention. To win the magic 1144, you need to win the nomination. There's a slight problem with that. Winner-take-all states on the rules are shoved back in the calendar. Later in the spring, April, May, June, I think even. The exception being South Carolina, which is obviously very soon. So let's look at the calendar. What does that leave you with when you take, and this is the key flaw with the Republican nominating process as far as their attempts to rig it, which seem to have done the opposite. If you look at the states that are voting in February, we're obviously very aware of Iowa tends to vote for a very conservative candidate. Voted for Rick Santorum in 2012, Mike Huckabee in 2008. I think Ted Cruz looks very good there. In Iowa has an excellent organization, that state. New Hampshire looking pretty good for Donald Trump. South Carolina tends to opt for a conservative candidate, voted for Newt Gingrich last time, famously derailed John McCain's campaign in 2000. Nevada has a very conservative Republican voting electorate in its caucus process, and Washington State has a caucus that no one seems to know anything about. But they have 2 caucuses and a primary, given the complexity of the process. So that's the early states that people are aware of. Now let's look at Super Tuesday, which tends to decide the nominee. What do you notice about this map of states voting on Super Tuesday? Well, it's sort of, you know, with a few exceptions, looks kind of like a map of the Confederacy. Very heavily conservative states voting on Super Tuesday. Why is this important? I'll come to it in a second. You then, on the Tuesday, and then this is the Saturday. You have some more very southern conservative states. Why is this so important? Because whoever devised this plan forgot, it seems, that it's not about getting delegates at this point. It's about winning state after state after state and creating an avalanche. Only in 1976, in the age of sort of democratic with a small d primaries that actually where they would look at the votes and the person who won the most votes would win, in this sort of extraordinary democratization of the candidate selection process. Only in 1976, when the late great Ronald Reagan challenged incumbent President Gerald Ford, did the Republican nomination truly become a delegate battle. And on every other occasion, candidate would win a few states, a handful of states, and then create an avalanche. Now, my premise is that what's going to happen on Super Tuesday is that Super Tuesday will arrive, and what will probably happen is no moderate who is acceptable to the Republican National Committee and the Republican establishment will actually arrive in Super Tuesday having won anything. Okay, they might, you know, John Kasich or Marco Rubio might have got second in New Hampshire. Whoop-de-doo. They will arrive on Super Tuesday with this map to fight. And if you're Ted Cruz and you've won Iowa and you've possibly won South Carolina, this romp through your home state of Texas and through the Deep South looks pretty good indeed to me. Moreover, if I'm just to go to what I think is my final slide, the states in the north that are voting early, as in voting before March the 5th, lots of them are caucuses, not primaries. Why is that important? In a primary is rather like a normal election where you turn up and you cast a vote and you're gone. Caucuses, dependent on the state, could take up a couple of hours of your evening huddling in a cold, in a cold schoolroom, chatting about the candidates, a much more intense political process. Turnout in caucuses is much lower. So the people who caucus tend to be much more fascinated with politics and therefore gravitate towards the political extremes. So again, my premise is that the next 2 months of the American nomination process, the Republican nomination process, could not have been better devised to favor a conservative maverick candidate like Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. And looking at this map, and I am a betting man, look at this map. If I was Ted Cruz at this stage, I'd be really quite happy. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for an overview of the process and the psephology and the likely outcomes and the runners and riders and potential winners of that process. Now to talk to us a little bit about the economic issues at stake and the economic policies that are likely to be debated. Brooks, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, this is going to be a little drier because I've actually gone into the detail of all the candidates, and there's not much. Before you're actually selected as the nominee, very few candidates really go into detail. But interestingly enough, the two most reasonable candidates that I am going to identify are the ones that have actually gone into detail, because you can see where their thinking is. So I'm going to begin with Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Now, Hillary's view is that she wants to tax cuts for middle class and small businesses, because she sees them as the people who are likely to come out and vote for her. She sees them as the engines of growth in the economy. She wants to raise the minimum wage. She does want to increase short-term capital gains tax, and that's effectively a tax on frequency trading. She also is very focused on a balanced budget. So I think none of those things seem crazy, out of line, or anything else. She does want to reform the current tax code, because she does talk about inequality in the tax system. And a little bit like Labour, she's sort of come up with a super tax. The super tax is not going to be at £150,000 or $250,000, but her 4% super tax is on those that actually earn over $5 million. Now, which I gather in the United States there's actually quite a few people. Something else that she's focused on, which I think resonates a little bit here, is when companies go about trying to hide their taxes by actually merging with companies in low tax areas. This is sort of called tax inversion. An example that people are talking about in the United States is the sort of Pfizer-Allergen merger, where Pfizer wants to get out of a high tax environment in the US, relatively merge with Allergen to lower taxes. She would certainly ban that. She wants a system of regional tax credits, so where blue-collar workers have suffered with jobs, she wants some form of tax system that's going to encourage people to invest in those areas, and she talks about banking reform. Bernie Sanders is probably he's sort of the Corbyn of the United States, which would probably put him somewhere in the middle of the Labour Party. He calls himself a democratic socialist. He talks about raising corporate tax, payroll tax, and tax on death duties, which is known as estate tax. He wants to reform the tax code, and most important of all, he's the only one talking about this, is he wants to reform Glass-Steagall and break up the big banks, which curiously enough both parties here were talking about. He also wants to bring in a financial transactions tax, and the reason why he wants to do that is that with that extra money that's raised, he wants all US kids to be able to go to college free. So the financial transactions tax will pay for college tuition, and he wants to raise the minimum wage, although he doesn't talk about what that level will be, and he has also talked about tax inversion. Now, turning to the Republicans, which is a wider field, you get a wider views. Now, I'm going to start with the most reasonable tax policy and economic policy that there is, and therefore I'm going to begin with Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, if you actually drill down into what he's talking about, forget about his whole views on Muslims and immigration and everything else, economically, he's actually thought through the issues. And a lot of what he talks about is not necessarily just appealing to those that love the Laffer curve and the ultra-rich or anything like that. He is trying to appeal, interestingly enough, to middle America and blue-collar workers. He talks about wanting a more dynamic economy, and he talks about himself as a successful businessman. Now, you could say that he's been bankrupt 3 times, but look, he's got out of the hole and made himself a success, and Americans love people who fall on their face and pick themselves up and do something with their lives. He wants there to be a strong debt limit. And he says that 19 trillion, which I would agree with, is way too high, and the country goes banco when it gets up to 24 trillion. So he's going to be very robust, he says, on limiting the amount of debt that there is. He also talks about a fair tax system, not a flat tax. he brings in 4 different tax bands: 0%, 10%, 20%, and 25%. He says that a flat tax is unfair on the poor and the workers and only benefits the wealthy. He also wants a tax on my old colleagues in the private equity hedge fund business, which is a tax on carried interest. Those of us who are in that business hung on to the belief that it's really capital gains and we should be taxed on capital gains. He's saying it's income and they should be taxed as income. He does want to, though, interestingly enough, and Americans love their deductions on their taxes, he actually also wants to phase out all deductions, including, interestingly enough, both charitable contributions and mortgage deductions. He is the only candidate really saying that. He wants to lower corporation tax to stimulate business, but he does, again, want to protect jobs in America by having a bigger import tax to, as he says, to bring jobs back from China and Mexico. And he also talks, in the same way that Hillary does, about this inversion tax on the likes of Pfizer who try and offshore their taxes. So that is why I believe, of the candidates, and you'll see that he is the most reasonable, has the most sensible economic policy. Bush is arguing that he has a strong record as governor of Florida. He wants 7 brackets to become 3 tax brackets at 28%, 25%, and 10%. He talks about a tax on carried interest. He wants to cut deductions on mortgages, but not charitable giving. He wants a corporation tax cut. And he does, interestingly enough, somebody whose family made their money in the energy sector, wants to phase out subsidies right across the board: wind, solar, gas, and oil. But unfortunately, when you look at what Bush is saying, there's very little detail and substance to what he's saying. If we move further along to the right, and by that I mean those who tend to believe in a flat tax, Cruz is very much pro a balanced budget. He wants a flat tax of 10% on income tax, capital gains tax, and dividends. He doesn't want any corporation or payroll tax at all, but he wants to bring in something called a 16% business transfer tax. He wants no death duties, but he does want to keep mortgage deductions and charitable deductions. And he does talk about, which is music to my ears, an end to QE. Rubio says he opposes the tax, borrow, and spend philosophy of the Obama administration. He wants 2 tax brackets. This is like going down from the 10-minute abs to the 8-minute abs to the 6-minute abs, those of you who've seen that film, Something Like Mary. So he's saying 2 tax brackets, one at 15% and one at 35%. No capital gains tax and no death duties at all. No deductions except on mortgages and charities. So he wants to keep the mortgages and charities deduction. He wants a simple 25% corporation tax, and he wants to repeal Dodd-Frank, and he's the only one talking about repealing Dodd-Frank. Carson, interestingly enough, and I think this is a good idea, talks about a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, so that so he wants it enshrined that you want to have a balanced budget. He also wants, which is a little bit like George Osborne did, a cut right across the board, across all departments, of 10% of their budgets. And he wants to abolish, he even wants to abolish some of the departments themselves. He wants a 14.9% flat tax on income and corporation, but he doesn't want any tax at all on capital gains, dividends, and estate duties. But he also doesn't want to exclude mortgages and charitable deductions. Those of us who run businesses, which I think is quite sensible, he is against depreciation on capital acquisitions, and he wants 100% write-off on year 1, so there are no games with depreciation. Moving on to Christie, and this is where we get sort of less and less detail. Christie talks about wanting a flatter, simpler tax system. He talks about 3 tax brackets with 28% at the top end. He wants no deductions except for mortgages and charities. but he wants corporation tax reduced from 35% down to 25%. And again, the only sort of thing that stands out in what he says, which is again a bit of a conservative policy over here, which is saying that there needs to be some sort of means testing of Social Security over a certain amount. And he's saying over $80,000, there should be some sort of means testing on Social Security benefits. Paul talks about wanting a flatter, fair tax system and small government. He has argued quite robustly that the Fed is insolvent and needs to be audited. He's the only one saying that. Those of us that have been saying actually the EU needs to be audited, it sort of comes from that sort of sensible sort of thinking. So I think that's actually quite a good idea. Again, he's a little bit like Trump is saying that he's completely against raising the debt limit at all, and he talks about wanting a balanced budget and slashing spending. No detail on what that means, other than saying in 5 years' time, he wants there to be a balanced budget, and the way he would go about that would be to abolish the following departments: the Department of Commerce, the Department of Housing, the Department of Education, and the Energy Department completely. I'm not sure who would do the work that they're doing, but that's what he says he would do. He wants to reform the tax code. He wants personal tax at a simple 14.5% with a $15,000 deduction. He wants no tax whatsoever, again, on capital gains, dividends, and death duties. He wants to cut corporation tax. But he does also want to, and he's the only one talking about this, raising the age at which Social Security is eligible from where it is now. It doesn't give how old you have to be, but that, again, I think will deal with some of the budget issues that he's talking about. And finally, Fiorina talks about a balanced budget, simplifying the tax code from 73,000 pages to 3 pages. She talks about a lower, flatter tax on business and personal income, no capital gains tax on small business investment, and no tax on internet sales. So one of the issues in the United States is that if you buy across borders, that there is a tax. And she's saying there shouldn't be a tax on that. So that is sort of my brief outline of the policies. And I think in the Q&A, if you've got some sort of questions on them. But you see there's quite a broad spectrum. But my conclusion is the most reasonable and balanced economic policy on the Democratic side, I think, is Hillary Clinton. And I think with the Republicans is Donald Trump.
I predict at the start of this evening, none of you came here expecting the commentary to be that Trump's plan is the most balanced and moderate, but there you've heard it after a thoroughgoing analysis of the economic approach to each of the candidates. Thank you very much, Brooks. Patrick, on the foreign policy angle, and also to tell us about some of the proposals and thoughts in your book, the stage is yours.
Well. Thank you, Mark. Always an honor to be invited to speak at the IEA. Thank you all for being here, friends and enemies. Equally welcome. I have to say I was a little unnerved when I first sat down. I found myself, on the left of the panel, shall we say. But then I was reassured by thinking, and you may have noticed I was kept encroaching on Kate's personal space, that from your point of view, I was just trying to get as far right as I possibly could. So set the tone nice and early. It's said that if you combine British pessimism with American optimism, you get divine realism. Now, although both the contents of my book and my remarks here this evening may be viewed by both friends and enemies as closer to evil than divine, I am attempting to be brutally realistic about the state of American foreign policy and the respective runners and riders hoping to take hold of the national security reins a year from now. Following a slew of opinion polls in recent weeks that have all shown that national security and foreign policy issues are now front of mind for most American voters, Hillary Clinton's campaign put out a media release stating the campaign's belief that this new, unexpected focus upon issues of war and peace, terrorism and diplomacy was fantastic news for Hillary's campaign and her prospects in November. Later in the same release, the campaign reaffirmed its belief in Father Christmas, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. Of the growing number of reasons why Hillary Clinton may not be elected president in November, her tenure as President Obama's diplomatic handmaiden looks increasingly like an electoral albatross. Today, America's friends don't trust her, that is, the country. Americans don't trust Hillary. But America's friends abroad don't trust her, and America's enemies don't fear her. On terrorism and on other fronts, it's less a case of America fighting with her hands tied behind her back, and more a case of her fighting blindfolded. For this sorry outcome, Hillary Clinton is certainly not entirely to blame, but she deserves a fair share of the blame. Never the nimblest of campaigners, she's playing a bad hand quite poorly. She says the greatest threat to national security is the spread of nuclear weapons, perhaps a reasonable answer. Yet she backs the president's nuclear deal with Iran, which all but guarantees a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. She says she'll deal effectively with Islamic State and with Al-Qaeda, but is so politically correct that, like Obama, she point-blank refuses to even say the words radical Islamic terrorism. Presumably she's worried, I figure, about hurting the feelings of, well, radical Islamic terrorists. The next few weeks will reveal a great deal, I think, about the nature of the partisan opposition to Clinton's preference for painting the world in neutral colors. Will the Republican nominee paint the world in black and white? Or will it be vivid reds, whites, and blues? Or perhaps the threat or promise of desert sand that actually glows in the dark? Thinking of radioactive rhetoric, with apologies to Forrest Gump, life's a lot like Donald Trump's foreign policy. You're never sure what you're going to get. Or at least you weren't until he declared his candidacy, because then the changing positions changed. Apparently for good. Since then, Mr. Trump has consistently outmuscled his Republican opponents for the nomination. But whereas the likes of Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and others are still channeling the essence of the neoconservative mindset regarding regime change, the regime change and the democracy building that brought us the Iraq debacle, Trump, who opposed toppling Saddam Hussein in 2003, consistently opposes opening any more Pandora's boxes in the Middle East. Instead, he only wants America to throw her weight around when her tangible interests are at stake. And he really doesn't care who partners with America in advancing her agenda. On these issues, and in these ways, Trump's actually much closer to Senator Ted Cruz, who speaks to a more traditional conservative view of America's place in the world, and to libertarian Senator Rand Paul, a non-interventionist, than Trump is to establishment Republican thinking. Whomever is the Republican nominee, that person will have to articulate a coherent alternative foreign policy vision in contrast to Obama's record and to Clinton's resume as Secretary of State. My recommendation is that he or she adopts what Mark referred to earlier, which I call muscular minimalism, as their mantra. An M&M foreign policy, as Mark suggested, would see America doing less around the world, but be better prepared to advance its agenda when action was required. In practical terms, these would-be presidents need to get back to basics. There's nothing new under the foreign policy sun, so there's no need to reinvent the diplomatic and national security wheels, but the art of cycling must, it seems, be relearned. To that end, my M&M playbook has 10 rules or plays that a candidate or nominee could employ to good effect, each one having been broken or contravened on numerous occasions over the past 15 years by Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, and respective secretaries of state. I'll run through them quickly with you, and hopefully they will provoke some outrage. If not, I'll have to revise them before we print more copies of the book. Number one, practice the foreign policy version of the Hippocratic Oath. First, simply do no harm. Second, don't invade a country if you must first consult a map to find out where it's located. As I say, all of these have been broken. Number three, only fight wars you plan and you know how to win. Number 4, listen to what your enemies tell you. Just because they're evil bastards doesn't mean they're lying when they tell you exactly what they're going to do to you and when they're planning on doing it. Number 5, don't do stupid stuff. Don't actually act upon the theory that global warming is a bigger threat to America's national security than terrorism. Number 6, never, ever negotiate from a position of weakness. Number 7, avoid taking sides in ancient religious and sectarian wars. This isn't rocket science, but it needs to be restated and relearned. Number 8, don't give money and weapons to those who hate you. Oh, it's not finished. Number 8 continues. Don't give money and weapons to those who hate you and who'll spend your money on attacking you and your friends, probably with your own weapons. Number 9, political correctness is a luxury that America's national security cannot afford. And number 10, employ foreign allies of circumstance to do what you can't or won't do overseas. America's next president needs to be a realistic warrior with emphasis upon the realistic. Someone who realizes weakness is provocative to evil, and therefore it's much safer to be feared than loved. Who realizes deterrence is everything, that innocence leads to impotence, but appreciates America can't afford any more unnecessary or unwinnable fights. Who can spot the difference between a real enemy and a potential partner, who appreciates the value of an actual strategy, who doesn't treat friends as enemies and enemies as friends. Above all, he or she needs to understand something that Obama simply hasn't grasped. Obama doesn't understand why his and Hillary Clinton's Kumbaya foreign policies have failed. That's because they do not understand why the man who sets out to radically change the world always fails. Because he fails to account for one simple thing: everyone else. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed. A longer exposition of Patrick's 10 key rules is available for £9 afterwards, just 90 pence per rule in the room opposite. Kate, the floor's yours.
Great. It's truly incredible when I think the only openly Republican person on the panel is going to be the most anti-Trump. That's not fair because you haven't spoken on him yet, but we'll see.
He exists.
I'm very glad to be going last. I think it's so important to understand what's actually happening with the American economy, with the election process, and with foreign policy, because I'm going to speak about domestic policy now, and so you have this basis, and I can now explain to you why it's all blowing up. People are so angry. They've been consistently telling pollsters that they care about the economy, they care about jobs, and they care about health care. And you have Democrats who continue to talk about climate change and equal pay. And you have Republicans who promised every single time that they took a new branch of government, they were going to reform the system and they were going to make it better. And they didn't. Now, they shouldn't have made those promises. They were going to be tough to keep with President Obama in the White House, but they made them and they didn't deliver. And this is a weird election because usually when we're talking about domestic policy during a presidential race, you talk about stats. President Obama and Governor Romney were going at each other's throats over the unemployment stats. It hadn't broken 8% in months and months and months, and Romney kept throwing that in Obama's face. Obama kept throwing back how badly Bush had destroyed the economy. And you had these nitty-gritty numbers, and people thought the election might actually be determined on them. And the current official unemployment rate is at 5.1%, but you don't really hear Democrats talking about that. And the unofficial unemployment rate's about 10%, and you don't hear Republicans talking about that. And you don't hear them talking about jobs or the economy or tax rates really at all. Not in the debates. In the debates, the Democrats have been talking about climate change, gun control, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and almost nothing else. And in the Republican debate, they've been talking about their CVs, and they've been talking about their backgrounds, and they've been talking about whether or not we need to build a wall sponsored by apparently Mexico Incorporated. And perhaps the assumption is that Republicans and Democrats don't have much to debate, that their tax rates are the same, they have the same general ideas about the issues at hand, but as we learned in Brooks's speech, that's not the case. There's actually a huge difference between these candidates. I don't trust Clinton is going to balance the budget, but Bernie Sanders is proposing a $19.1 trillion tax hike on the American people, and I don't think she's going to do that either. And so what we have to ask ourselves is, why have these debates gone so radical? Why are these candidates on such radical sides of the aisle in both of their parties? And I think the answer is twofolded. The first answer is that there is a deep, resentful partisanship that's been growing between these parties for years now. And I think this can be traced back to the biggest piece of domestic legislation that we've seen in a decade over in the States, and that's the Affordable Care Act. When Obama came into office, he offered hope, he offered change, and he offered unity. And he said he wanted to reach across the aisle and bring people back together. But when he had a shot at a supermajority for just over 4 months, when one of the Republican senators decided to move to being a Democrat and he had that supermajority, he decided to start ramming that health care bill through the Senate and through the House, which he also had a majority of. And he had that supermajority so the Republicans couldn't filibuster it. But then Ted Kennedy died in Massachusetts, which is a very liberal state. And Scott Brown stepped up to run as a Republican. And a Republican hadn't beat a Democratic candidate, I think, since 1972 or since the 70s. So they didn't think he was going to win. But he campaigned on the platform that he would be that one vote to bring Obamacare to the table. And even in liberal Massachusetts, they wanted that check on the president. So they gave him the opportunity and they voted him in. And what did Obama do? He kept the Senate bill as it was, and he didn't let Scott Brown vote on it, and he rammed it through the House. And the Republicans saw that as a true act of war. This was a president who had no desire to speak to Republicans. And since then, the gridlock in Washington has been terrible. The president can't even speak to the Republicans when it comes to the issue of the debt ceiling. He has to send Joe Biden, his VP, because they won't speak to him and he won't speak to them. Which means that really for the past 5 years, nothing of substance has gone through any kind of legislation. And that's a problem because there are real issues that need to be addressed. The second reason I think we're witnessing this radicalization is because along with this huge amount of gridlock, America's also been going through a massive cultural transformation. We've had this phenomenon of censorship at schools, safe spaces, microaggressions, jazz hands. It's all unfolding at once. We've also discovered this immense amount of police brutality which has come to light, but in many ways has also been used in a political way and manipulated for political advantage. You had the state of Louisiana being sued by the federal government because they were suing them and accusing them of racial segregation because they were offering vouchers to poor kids and they were busing them out to better schools. You had the Supreme Court rule in favor of gay marriage across all of the states. And immigration last year in 2015 hit its highest percentage ever in 8 years. It's estimated by 2023, 1 in 7 US residents will be a foreign-born person. Now, I like some of those things. I'm a big fan of immigration and I'm very supportive of gay marriage, but a lot of Americans don't. And it's not just the Republicans who value that socially conservative tradition. A lot of liberals and young people feel like they've lost out to globalization. Jobs have moved overseas, immigrants have come in and from their perspective taken their jobs, and they feel like they've done everything right and still ended up with the short end of the stick. And Americans feel at the moment like the establishment hasn't protected American rights. And that's why you've seen this crazy rise of the anti-establishment candidate in both parties. So if you're a Senator Bernie Sanders supporter, you're blaming Wall Street and you're blaming the big banks for your poor fortune. He's gained a huge amount of attraction by attacking Hillary Clinton for her bank donations and by telling people that it's the government and it's the banks who are in each other's pockets and they're keeping you poor. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, then you believe that the immigrants are the problem and they've come in and they've taken your jobs. You also probably think that you have been censored in a way. You can't speak out, you can't speak your mind without risking your job or risking your status in your neighborhood anymore. And Trump's offering to overthrow our politically correct system. And his entire campaign is proposing to make America great again. But what he means is he's taking America back to look like it once looked and to act like it once acted. And competing ideologies, whether that be religion or your race or where you're from are quite literally going to be put on a bus and sent out of the country. So, on the whole, I look at the Donald Trump phenomenon and I think that he's being supported by a lot of people who feel marginalized. And they're told, A, you can't be marginalized because you're a majority, and B, you have to work in this way. Well, a majority in terms of race or in terms of the makeup of America, at least. And you have to act this way, otherwise you're going to get into all kinds of trouble. And that's why you see this boisterous character coming through and championing those people. It was just a few days ago that he was on TV talking about how we were going to win. Yet again, we're going to win, we're going to win. And he said, you'll beg me, Mr. President, let us lose at least once or twice, but I'm going to say no, we're going to win. And this sounds so ridiculous, but there are a lot of blue-collar workers out there who really feel like it's time to take back something that's been taken away from them. Whether it has or not, I think, is very much up for discussion. I'm not one of those Trump supporters, but this is how these people are feeling. The last thing I'm going to touch on tonight is, from a domestic perspective, the issue of favorability and also relatability. Favorability matters in presidential elections very much. Americans like to imagine having a beer with the candidate. Or if it's George W. Bush who didn't drink, they like to imagine they could just sit down in a pub with him and he can have a water. But they want to be there and they want to like him. They want to like who they're listening to and who they're looking at. And the numbers are so interesting on the Republican side for favorability, because everyone's looking at Trump in the polls and they're thinking he's so far ahead. He's at 27, 37% in some of these states. And his likability rating is around 30%. His unlikability rating amongst independents, or his likability rating amongst independents, is at a negative 27. And amongst Democrats is at a negative 70. Now, compare that to Rubio, who's fairly moderate. He's at a plus 46 with Republicans. He's at a plus 4 with independents. He's at a minus 28 with Democrats. Compare it to Cruz, who's quite radical and quite far right. He's at a plus 51% favorability with Republicans. He's only at a minus 3 with independents, and he's only at a minus 37 with Democrats. So those numbers immediately would tell me, if I were just looking at those numbers, that Trump certainly has no shot becoming president, and even to become the nominee, he's going to have to do very, very well very early to bring in the votes that he would actually need to get all the delegates. The problem is that the story doesn't end there, and actually Chad Wilcox at the IEA flagged this up to me, and it's super interesting. The exit pollsters after November 2012 asked people what was the most important candidate quality. Was it vision for the future, shared my values, cares about people like me, and strong leader? And on vision for the future, shared my values, and strong leader, Mitt Romney beat Barack Obama. He beat him on all of them. But it was at 81 to 18% in Obama's favor on cares about people like me. And that is not the same question as favorability. Being relatable and being favorable are not the same. And actually, Donald Trump is trying so hard to bring in those votes who think that he cares about them. He's willing to say the thing that they don't want to say. And when he says something deeply xenophobic, deeply offensive, when he just says something that's plain wrong and not true, they forgive him because they think he's trying his very best to at least represent people like them. Well, good. I'm summing up. I think my biggest frustration with the domestic front of U.S. politics at the moment is that they're angry with the president for promising unity and not delivering it. They're angry with the Republicans because they said they'd get change when they got those branches of the House and Senate, and they haven't. And now they're feeding into the anti-establishment candidates. Bernie Sanders is promising trillions of dollars in spending that he's not going to get. And Donald Trump is promising to keep people out of the country and to deport a lot of people out of the country. In many ways, these things could be considered unconstitutional. So I think the public is still being conned, and I'm curious in the next caucus and in the next few primaries to see whether or not people wake up to that reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. We've got time for questions, interjections, cross-examination. So if you'd like to ask a question, stick your hand in the air. The further back you are in the room, the more I need you to wave wildly. If you're in the other room and want to ask a question, leave that room and come into this room. If you're watching on the live stream over the internet back at home, I don't know, tweet us or something.
Mark, can I just ask, if I don't know the answer, can I go into that room?
Yeah, yeah, we might send you that. And if you, I know a good number of you in the audience, but if you can introduce yourself and where you're from. So I'm going to take 4 together at the back. Ryan, Charlie, and then 2 there. I can't quite see your faces. And Ralph will bring you the microphone.
My question is quite a simple one. Is Donald Trump a conservative? And if not, is the conservative base a bit less ideologically purely conservative than many conservative commentators thought it was?
Okay, thank you. Charlie.
I'm Charlie Wolf, and Donald Trump has been very good to me as a commentator. I'll just add 2 to your list of 10. Number 11, know how to explain American exceptionalism when you're in front of a group of German students. And number 12, if you're going to set a red line, keep it. But my question is, how much is Barack Obama the product, or I should say Trump the product of Barack Obama, and how much does perception as reality play in maybe making Trump win this thing?
Okay, and then there were 2, just I couldn't quite see people just in front of you there.
Thanks very much. Hi there, Alex Gawanter. My question is directed at Kate. If Donald Trump is so racist and xenophobic, as you seem to be suggesting, why is he polling so well with minorities, including ethnic minorities and women, both of the African American and Hispanic categories?
And I'm Andrew Sabisky, and my question is, isn't there a libertarian case for Trumpian immigration policy? Purely because Hispanified America is never going to be libertarian in a million years. Like if you just look at Central America or South America and the quasi-socialist policies there.
Okay, thank you. Well, a diverse range of questions. I'll move along the panel in the order in which they spoke, but just to, and quite a lot focused on Donald Trump in particular. Is he actually appealing within the Republican Party outside of the traditional conservative base? So maybe there isn't a conservative base, or at least it's not as wide or as reliable as some supporters of the Republican Party might think. Charlie asked, in addition to adding to Patrick's list of foreign policy rules, whether Trump's a kind of product of a backlash against Obama. Alex particularly asked towards Kate if he is this sort of extreme populist. Somebody described him as a proto-fascist to me the other day. Why is he so popular over and beyond the demographic that you would expect that to appeal to? And how should people of a free market bent take the whole immigration debate? Is there needs for restrictions given what's on the American borders? Well, I'll start with you, Mark.
I think this question as to whether Donald Trump is a conservative is very interesting because it falls back to the question of what is an American conservative. And we start to look, I've been asked by a number of friends to sort of say, what is the historical parallel for Donald Trump? And the only one I could find obvious within US politics was Governor George Wallace of Alabama, who ran for who was a segregationist governor of Alabama, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. It went well for a time for him until he was shot. Though he was re-elected governor of Alabama after being shot, which is always good. But he was a pretty progressive Democrat on most social policy as governor of Alabama, in terms of education, healthcare, unemployment, all these things. And lots of the Dixiecrats were in the Deep South. And he ran as a segregationist candidate in the 1968 Democratic Party nomination. And this was still at a point where the Democrats had a virtual lock, not necessarily at a presidential level, because Eisenhower had won some of these states at a Deep South states at presidential level, but certainly had a deep lock on all the governor's races, most of the congressional seats, etc., most of the Senate seats. And it was interesting that this strain of Democrat existed and continued to exist on a state level right up until really up until 2010 in many ways. When Barack Obama first won his huge majority that Kate alluded to in 2008, lots of those congressional districts that voted, that were around in 2008, still had an old-fashioned conservative Democrat representing them. And when you look at the polls of Trump supporters, it is clear that many of them were Democrats 20, 30, even 40 years ago. So, but they would be conservative Democrats, certainly culturally conservative on issues like abortion and gay marriage, certainly anti-globalization. And I think when we start to look at where Trump is doing well and where he will do well in the primaries, it is exactly where Kate alluded to that people feel left out of the political process. And these are exactly the sort of places that George Wallace did extremely well in 1968. These places that felt left behind by the sort of swing 60s boom. My final point is that this cultural partisanship, there's nothing new about it at all. If you look at American politics in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, that this cultural war has been going on for a long time. What is different is that local factors and popular local, say, Democratic politicians in a conservative district have been removed. All politics in America is now national, and people vote. If people are conservatives, they vote Republican. This didn't used to be the case, and Donald Trump is very effective in tapping into that kind of conservative Democrat.
Well, thank you for that overview. I am going to ask our panellists to keep it quite short if they can, because I know there's lots of other questions incoming. So don't feel that you need to address all of the points.
I will be brief. Donald Trump is a New Yorker, or New York, New Jersey. I mean, so he's really culturally a Democrat. What he's done is he has probably listened to Linton Crosby somehow with some secret microphone, and is using dog whistle politics, and just taken it on steroids. When Michael Howard here had his sort of dog whistle politics in the 2005 election, I think Trump is doing that. I think actually, if you look at the history of Trump, he's never been a radical. He's a loud-mouthed New Yorker, and he's just decided to see. You know, he had this thesis several years ago that he could say crazy things and sort of people would listen. But actually, I don't think in his core he is as crazy as everybody is saying it. He's just an attention seeker. I think, you know, I know we shouldn't be focusing so much on Trump, but he is the name in town. Yeah, I mean, Trump is the antidote to Obama. And Cruz is trying to play up to that, and a lot of the Republicans are trying to play up to that. And I think Hillary has a problem in that people will think, you know, she's just an extension of what the Obama policy is. So in that ways, I think she's going to struggle.
Patrick. Donald Trump is a conservative in the American context. Elections are bad times for litmus tests, as most parties discover to their cost. What Donald Trump is a populist conservative, and that means he fits rather well, certainly far better than people imagined, within the grassroots of today's Republican Party. The change is that the so-called establishment that is used to, with one or two exceptions, running things for the Republicans and particularly choosing their presidential nominees, they themselves are rather out of step with their own party. So they sort of want their party back because they're used to being in charge, and the grassroots rather keen to kick them out because they actually believe, well, it's our party really. And Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, people like that sound a lot more like us than you guys in your country clubs and on Wall Street do. It doesn't mean one side is inherently right or wrong, better or worse, but I think that's the reality. Donald Trump, as a byproduct of Obama, definitely, but although there's specific policies, economic and foreign, that play into that, above all else, Americans are crying out for what they believe is leadership. The lack of leadership on foreign domestic economic policy is something that is a huge problem they feel, and Donald Trump, whether you agree with him or not, screams leadership. He is a CEO type, and Americans increasingly think that's the kind of person you want as president, having had 8 years of a university professor type as president. They no longer believe the White House is a seminar. I think the White House is about making decisions, tough decisions, and Trump plays into that quite well. And I'll leave it at that because we have...
Kate, and there was a particular challenge to you.
Yes, there was. I'm excited to address it. Very quickly to Charlie about this perception versus reality. I think perception will play a part, but I actually think it might not work in Trump's favor. His whole media campaign is that he's a winner. And I think if he doesn't win in Iowa, normally for a front runner, that actually wouldn't be a huge impact, because like it was said earlier, it's a very socially conservative place, and sometimes the Iowa caucus winner doesn't go on to get the nomination.
Almost never.
Almost never. But if Trump loses in Iowa in the first vote and the first caucus, I think that's a huge blow to his campaign, which is fundamentally grounded in being a winner. So we'll see what happens there. To the minorities point, it's a really interesting point. You got to break it down. I mean, yes, Donald Trump is doing okay with women, but if you break it down, they are white, married, conservative women, and Mitt Romney did well with them, and George Bush did well with them. If you are actually talking about bringing in new voters, look to the single woman who's usually under the age of 40. They're not going to Donald Trump. They're going exactly where you'd expect. They're going to Hillary Clinton, and her worry is Bernie Sanders. Or maybe potentially somebody like Marco Rubio, who's fairly moderate. But they're not going to Trump. In terms of Hispanics, I have seen some polling numbers that have him doing slightly better than other Republican candidates, and certainly candidates in the past. That's an interesting one and a tough one, because there is a theory out there, and I'm not sure I subscribe to it, that there are lots of legal Hispanics in the country who are frustrated with illegal Hispanics coming in. And they feel like they're giving them a bad name. So there's that element, but there's no reason to believe that Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio wouldn't be able to bring in those votes. And the last thing I would say is that if you look at just general minority polling, Trump might have a slight edge, but when I say edge, I mean that Mitt Romney was able to bring in less than 10%, and he might be able to bring in 12%. We are looking, like, there's no swing. There's no swing to the Republicans with these minorities based on Donald Trump. It's still significantly lower than what the Democrats get.
Okay, I'll come back to the floor in a minute. I'd like to give priority there to people who want to ask a question about anything other than Donald Trump. So if you're in that category, put your hand in the air. But I do just want to close off the sort of Trump discussion of it by asking the panel, is that, look, there's as many differences as there are similarities, but are there some similarities with the UKIP phenomenon in the United Kingdom that is appealing to sort of blue-collar, left-behind voters, not necessarily people that you would associate with just being sort of shyer Tories, who feel that the world's leaving them behind, they're being dealt a bad hand, that culture, as they understand it, is being undermined and cosmopolitanized? Is it that sort of phenomenon? And often there are the debates about, to what extent is UKIP a Conservative party or a right of centre party? Is that, from British eyes, a reasonable analogy to use?
10 seconds. The answer is yes, particularly since I think Donald Trump is a Tea Party politician, very much appealing to blue-collar workers, which in many ways Nigel Farage picked up a lot of those votes. He didn't win any seats, but certainly of the 4 million or so voters that voted for UKIP at the last election, lots and lots of those were blue-collar Labour traditional voters who liked what he was saying.
Yes, these left-behind the left-behind voters are direct equivalents, and campaigns that understand that it's culture and identity and belonging that drive politics, not any given policy. But my only point on the difference is the Republicans have a pure primary process. So the ability of such left-behind people and such movements to, for want of a better word, hijack a large political party is nothing like what we would have. It would be the equivalent of if UKIP were able to take over the Conservative Party in full through a primary process. That is what we're looking at here.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. In the US context, a lot of them are voters who used to be explicitly targeted by the Democrats, but they not only feel left behind, but they feel ignored and overlooked by both parties. And so if Donald Trump is able to keep them on side and get them to the polls, the electorate will expand, or at least that portion of it. And that, if it happens, will be devastating for the Democrats.
Yes, but I think that UKIP is far more, their ideology is much stronger in terms of their commitment to it. I think that Donald Trump is saying what people want to hear. I think UKIP has a very clear ideology and they've stuck to it for years.
Okay, let's take a few more questions, preferably not about Donald Trump, nor indeed about Sarah Palin. That would just be a cheap way of talking about Donald Trump. Could I come to the front of I'll take this gentleman in the aisle and then these two at the front. And again, if you could introduce yourself, that would be terrific.
Yeah, my name's Charles. This is going to be about Trump, I'm afraid. No, it's not. If Trump were to drop out for whatever reason tomorrow, how does that affect the Republican stable of candidates?
Okay, then here at the two at the front.
Thank you. Irina Summerton, Institute of Historical Research, University of London. I'm very fed up. I want to say that I'm both British and American, and I'm a true blue Tory here, but I'm a slightly right-of-center independent in America. And I had been planning to vote for Hillary Clinton, who's running a lousy campaign, and she's clinging to Obama, who I've always thought since 2008 was a total fake, and he's proven to be a fake, and just totally, for himself. And just read the Washington Post every day, as I do, and you'll see they hate, loathe, and despise him and insult him at every opportunity. And the New York Times is more polite, but they hate him as well. And she's tied herself to him. And then there's Trump, who is starting to want to, because the other candidates are so awful.
And your question is, do the panel agree?
It's just a comment. I want to know how they feel about it. I'm very interested. I'm very into politics, and I haven't a clue who to vote for because they're all so awful.
Okay. And then the gentleman here.
Thank you. My question's about the opinion polls and
Could
the
you
process.
just introduce yourself?
Michael Ezra. It's about opinion polls and the process of polling. I've never seen a campaign process anywhere in the world as the one in the Americans have to go through with every election, where campaigns are recalibrated constantly by the results of opinion polls, and where opinion polls inform people as to how they should be voting, which is the exact inverse of the way it should be. Now, in light of the disastrous polling that took place here before May the 7th, is there anything that the panel would like to say about how this process is being driven in America, and whether American pollsters are actually changing their approach or re-examining the way that they obtain information, which eventually will be fed back to the campaigns?
Michael, thank you. So let me just reframe some of those. I'll start with Kate this time and work around the panel again. If you can keep your answers just to about a minute each. Charles asked about the race. If Trump drops out, you might want to expand on that a bit. If candidate X or Y dropped out, what would the impact be? And I know, Kate, you were saying in some of your remarks, I mean, Trump might be ahead, but only because there's such a large field. I mean, if there was almost a primary within a primary, it might be that the more establishment Republican candidate would rise and beat him. But what might be the implications there? I mean, it was everybody's so awful. Who should one vote for? But I suppose if I could just reframe that slightly differently. If you are of a free market sort of libertarian bent and relatively socially progressive, that's me basically. Who should I vote for if I was an American citizen? Who are the most sort of classical liberal candidate, irrespective of their prospects? And don't say Governor Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party, because I already know that. And then on the polls and trust and the process itself, how reliable or meaningful is that at the moment? I'm now a few weeks out of date, but a few weeks ago I was sort of looking at the numbers in Iowa, and it was pointed out on the previous electoral cycle at about that time, just before Christmas, Michelle Bachmann and Herman Cain were the two sort of leading the field, and both of them disappeared within weeks. So should we be too head up on what the polls are telling us now about who's likely to win and who isn't? Kate?
Yeah, well, to answer your question, Mark, if you are a conservative, constitutionalist, libertarian, relatively progressive in your social ideology, I think the only candidate for you is Rand Paul. he's not going to win. So if you're trying to be, which is upsetting.
My side never wins.
But if you're trying to be pragmatic in your vote, I would probably say Ted Cruz, a true constitutionalist. I certainly don't agree with everything that he says, but I think that he is very committed to cutting back the size of government. And I think if he were given the opportunity, especially with a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, you would see massive, massive cuts to spending. So that would be my suggestion. I think if Trump were to drop out tomorrow, you would see a Cruz and Rubio bloodbath. They're the hungriest. They're the hungriest. They want it so much. It would get very disgusting and exciting. I'm frustrated too. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm so frustrated. And I'm frustrated. I'm somewhat frustrated with voters because I think if we put up Ted Cruz in the Republican Party, we will lose. Don't see him becoming the president. And it's frustrating to me that people potentially are blowing a great opportunity to take what I think is a relatively easy election with anybody else over Hillary. So I'll stop there.
Patrick.
The advantage of being evil is you never get frustrated, so that's a good thing. If Trump goes, it obviously depends on when he drops out, if he drops out. But I think the safe assumption, I mean, his votes will go all over the place, but most of them, a disproportionate number will go to Cruz. I would also say that following that, if Fiorina's still around, I think she will pick up a good chunk of those, and I also think Christie will. I mean, in terms of speaking to leadership, speaking to tough on terror. And on Christie, I actually think that's Mark's candidate because he's the most in favor of legalized gambling, online casinos and all of that. It's a big part of the New Jersey economy, so I think that's where you should, in one form or another, put your money.
It's very tough on drugs.
And on polling, what the pollsters, it is happening in America. They are adjusting. They have had to. They have made their own mistakes. What I think they are, above all, is becoming more cautious, both in their methodology is becoming more comprehensive, but their commentary on their own data is becoming more cautious. The problem in American polling and American elections has always been turnout. You just don't, not as many people turn out, so it's harder to say. Presidential elections, it's a different electorate to congressional elections, so it's all about who shows up. Obama got reelected, not because he was wildly popular, because he got his people out and Romney didn't get his. So the turnout aspect, they've learned their lessons. Most of them, did not so well in 2012. So they'll be more cautious in their projections and predictions and forecasts for 2016. Brooks.
Yeah, I'm just going to answer the question on if Trump drops out. I think it'll be Cruz versus Rubio, and my view is that if at any stage the Republicans get smart, that Rubio is the most likely person to beat Clinton, and I think Clinton will be the Democratic candidate. So I don't know if that'll happen.
I think if Trump drops out, lots of his voters just go home, because I think there isn't anything else for them on the menu that they'll find particularly appetizing. Why there was the point about Hillary tying herself to Barack Obama very strongly. One of the biggest reasons she's doing that is to keep particularly African American and youth turnout at their unprecedentedly high levels. If black turnout returns to its 2004 levels, the Republicans can almost win the presidency just on the back of that demographic turnout shift. What are opinion polls doing to improve their record? In the states, they've done slightly better than they have here. Famously, they performed particularly badly in the New Hampshire primary 2008, where they predicted Barack Obama would walk it, but Hillary actually won. Opinion polls are being used less by campaigns themselves. The most sophisticated campaigns are using micro-targeting and direct vote contact and what they call experiment-informed programs, where they're running essentially controlled experiments, the scientific basis on the electorate. Very good book on this by Sasha Isenberg called Victory Lab, the science of winning campaigns. Basically, sophisticated campaigns have within them the infrastructure that is far better than anything a polling company could have, because they have the voter file. They have a voter file links with all kinds of commercial data and online data, etc., that allows them to make much more accurate predictions. And I'm particularly, when I say sophisticated campaigns, I'm talking here particularly about the Ted Cruz campaign on the Republican side, probably the most sophisticated in these terms. Bernie Sanders' campaign is running extraordinarily sophisticated analytics, and I suspect the Hillary Clinton campaign are too. They just don't talk about it in the media so much. But polling, I would say, becoming much less important in American politics. It's just nice to inform us, the public.
Let's just take a few more. We're running a bit out of time. I'll take 1, 2, 3. We start with Tom and then come to the front row. Again, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tom Papworth, Senior Fellow at the Adam Smith Institute. There is a narrative that general elections are decided by the moderates who don't get involved in primaries and caucuses. To what extent is that true? If so, why is it the selectors seem to be unable to grasp that fact? And if both parties do select the extremists, so we have, say, a Trump-Sanders split, how's that going to pan out?
And then I'll take these two at the front.
My name is Stephen Radofsky. In a general election, how important is Bill Clinton for Hillary Clinton? She's such a boring candidate, and does he give her a bit of an uptick in interest?
Jeannie Cameron from JCIC. My question goes back to your wager, Mark, about somebody like Michael Bloomberg sort of coming in as a knight in shining armour to, solve the situation. Is something like that at all likely and possible? And if so, what would be the timing and the process for that to happen?
Okay, so a few questions there. Tom was sort of saying, is it true that the traditional sense of looking at this is you have to sort of run to your party's base to get the nomination, and then when you've got that, you have to race back to the middle to try and win the general election. How true is that? And if you like, how tactically inept are Republican voters being to sort of, you mentioned, I think if the polls are to believe Brooks, you're right that Rubio appears to be the most likely to beat a Democrat. Are there such things as just tactical Republicans who say, well, I don't really care who our nominee is, I just want to pick the guy who can beat the Democrats? Or are people voting sort of too ideologically? What's the role of the former president, Bill Clinton, in assisting the campaign? And on sort of Jeannie's point, or my wager, what do you think the chances are that things could go completely berserk? We don't end up with Clinton against Rubio, we end up with Sanders against Trump, against people on independent tickets with some sort of prospect of winning. Mark, I'll start with you, and then I'll finish up with Kate.
Yeah, I think your presumption about general elections being decided by moderates who don't engage in the primary, that's broadly speaking absolutely correct. I think that what the Republican right have done, however, is to look at the success of Democrats in sending very liberal messages to liberal groups of voters like young people to get them to turn out. But in my view, these messages should be highly targeted rather than just spurted on the airways to switch off moderates. Kind of related, how important is Bill for Hillary? When Bill Clinton won the presidency in 1992, 1996, he won some hugely conservative counties. If you look at places like Western Pennsylvania, just stacked up votes there. He carried his home state of Arkansas, very clearly. Kentucky, Tennessee, all these states where Democrats don't really get to look at anymore. And if I was the Clinton campaign this time, I would park Bill Clinton in the Appalachian bits of Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, talking to those white working class voters who voted for him time and again, who were Democrats, who are still registered Democrats, and probably haven't voted Democrats since 2000, and try and win those back for Hillary Clinton. On the Bloomberg point, I just don't quite buy that in an anti-establishment mood in the country at large, that America is ready to have someone so obviously elitist and part of the liberal urban establishment as Michael Bloomberg, particularly his stance on guns. I think switches off.
Could there be another wild card there? I mean, it didn't beat Bloomberg.
I think that more likely than an independent is that, for instance, if the Democratic Party nominates Bernie Sanders as president, whether the decision by Joe Biden not to run for president changes. But as we saw with, I think it's very similar to the Labour Party over the summer. It became of course Jeremy Corbyn can't be leader, oh maybe he will be leader, oh we need to stop him being leader, and then it turns out there's actually no way of doing that. And I think we'll see a similar thing, certainly with the Republican Party, I'm 80% certain with the Republican Party, possibly with the Democrats, but less likely.
Brooks.
Yeah, I think to appeal to the moderates, the Republicans have to flip-flop to a greater extreme than the Democrats. So, you know, I think what Hillary is saying, you get what's on the tin. I think, really any of the runners and riders in the Republican Party, they'd have to do a flip-flop. And if there's a flip-flop, you saw what happened to Romney. So I think that is really unlikely. I think when it comes to Bill Clinton, I think, look, the people who hate the Clintons are the Republicans. So I think Bill, can only bring a little bit of stardust to Hillary's campaign. And I think there is sort of a thinking that you get, you know, buy one, get one free. And you bring along the benefits of Clinton. And I think someone who, notwithstanding the Monica Lewinsky stuff and everything else, if Bill had stood a third time, I believe Bill Clinton would have won a third time. So I think Bill brings a lot more to Hillary than I think a lot of people say. And I think there's zero, I'm not going to say zero, but I think it's highly unlikely some random third-party person comes in, because I think the mood on the floor is going to be, you know, you weren't in the game to begin with, so we're not going to give it to you now. There's no rationale at the moment.
Patrick.
Both the elites and the grassroots in the Republican Party are tired of losing presidential elections. So both are committed to winning this time. But they have a different take on how that happens. The elite have what is the sort of conventional wisdom take. Another moderate, or at least the most moderate choice. Jeb Bush was the big hope. Might be Kasich, and perhaps Rubio is moderate enough. He does well in the polls and matchups against Clinton. The problem for the elite, and the mad genius perhaps of Donald Trump's timing, is that the grassroots have looked at 2008 and 2012 and said, we did what the conventional wisdom and our leaders told us to do. We elected John McCain, independent-minded, maverick, pulls in all those moderate voters. The people in the New York Times, they say he's a good guy. Mitt Romney, moderate, had to sort of prove he wasn't too moderate, but moderate enough. Both of them lost. So the grassroots of the Republican Party they want a conservative president, but they actually have convinced themselves, rightly or wrongly, that a conservative candidate is actually more likely to win than a moderate Republican candidate. Bill Clinton is a net plus, and the evidence that he is potentially at least a net plus is the fact that in recent weeks Donald Trump has started going after him. Because Donald Trump, as we know, doesn't play defense, he only plays offense. And he only goes after people and organizations and issues that he thinks are strong and have the potential to threaten him. Whether he can inoculate himself against Bill Clintonism, whether he can damage Clinton, we don't know, but he will go after him. And lastly, I agree, a third-party independent bid is unlikely to be successful, though it could happen. A brokered convention, particularly on the Republican side, I guess Mark alluded to in his introductory remarks, brokered Republican convention could bring up all kinds of possibilities, including Ryan, including Romney, including other people as well.
There you go, Kate. You're going to get Mitt Romney as president after all.
Stop. Can't get that excited. Tom, Mitt Romney won independents by 5 points, 55 to 45 in 2012.
That's 10 points.
Sorry. Yes, 10 points. In 2012. And he lost. And he lost because of the moderate vote, because people still came out in waves because they consider themselves moderate but not independent, and there's a difference. That moderate vote really matters, and independents are actually not necessarily the best indicator as to who's going to win the election. Bill Clinton is a tough one, because this is a man who definitely brings net positives to the game. He's charismatic. Democrats do love him. Moderates like him. Independents liked him. But there have been rustlings, and they haven't come to surface yet. But there have been a few op-eds, a few dug-up op-eds from Maureen Dowd at the New York Times about the kind of articles that could be written and the kind of punditry we could get if Hillary Clinton is the nominee and Bill Clinton is on stage with her. Not necessarily about his bad behavior in the past, but about her reaction to it, her comments about Monica Lewinsky, her comments about women who made accusations about Bill when he was governor of Arkansas, victim shaming, and the like. And that is not okay in 2016, especially when you're running as the Democrat first female president who claims to champion women. And I think she might find some unlikely enemies with the feminists who are supposed to be her friends.
Okay, we have just run over, but I've really got to push the panel on a very short question. I'll start with Kate and then go over to Mark. Who will be the Democrat nominee? Who will be the GOP nominee? And who will be inaugurated as president a year today? Kate.
All right, a single vote has not been cast yet, so this is very, very broad. I think it will be Hillary Clinton, and I think you are looking at Ted Cruz potentially, but a single vote has not been cast yet.
Clinton and Cruz, and who would win between the two of them? Clinton.
I think Cruz would win.
Okay. Patrick.
Hillary will be the Democratic nominee. Marco Rubio will be on the Republican ticket, either in the top spot or the second spot. I think he's got a very good chance of being the nominee. If it's not Rubio, I think it's Trump.
So Clinton against Rubio, brackets Trump, and who would win that battle? Who would win the general election?
Rubio beats Clinton.
Clinton beats Trump.
I think it's too close to call.
There you go. Exciting stuff. Brooks.
Gosh, I'm very close to you. So I think Clinton beats Trump, and I think Rubio beats Clinton. I do think Rubio is on the ticket somewhere, but if he's at the top, I think Rubio wins.
I think that the battle between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders might actually end up being tighter than the battle on the Republican side. I think that Hillary will end up as the nominee because she has her firewall in the South with her support amongst the African-American vote, who again are early in the primary process. She will be the Democratic nominee, but I don't think she'll win either Iowa or New Hampshire. So Sanders will get the momentum. On the Republican side, I am fairly convinced that Ted Cruz will be the nominee. I think that he has the best grassroots organization. I think the map favors him. And I think as people like more establishment people start to drop out, he'll get some of their people against Trump. I think it will be a Cruz versus Trump game. And I think Hillary will win, but it will not be the blowout some on the Democratic side expect.
Very interesting. Listen, just before I won't offer you a prediction, but just a little piece of history on this. We started out with Mark's number 1948, the last time that the Democrats won 3 consecutive presidential elections on the spin. The last time that the Republicans won a presidential election without the surname Bush or Nixon somewhere on the ticket was 1928. I gather that Richard Nixon's offspring aren't up to very much at the moment, so if that rule is true, perhaps Jeb Bush is the sensible option to win. Can I just a couple of housekeeping announcements. Presumably, the IEA is in contact with you because you've made it here tonight, so thank you for coming. But if you would like to receive our email newsletter inviting you to future events and you're not receiving that regularly, that comes out each Sunday, please drop your business card or write your email address on a slip of paper and throw it in the goldfish bowl, which is in the main reception area. Don't forget to buy Patrick's book, £9, one-off offer for tonight. You'll sign them for free, I hope, possibly. And they're on sale in the room opposite. Please, if you can stay a little longer, join us for a drink in the room opposite. If you are watching us on the live stream at home, go to your fridge, open the door and help yourself to any drink that you care to name. Thanks very much, though, most importantly to all, to Mark, Brooks, Patrick and Kate for a fascinating, wide-ranging discussion. It's been a great pleasure having you. Thank you all.